All right, let's make sure I'm live. There we go. All right, we are live. What is up, everybody? This is going to be Chapter 2, Patterns of Disorder, that we're doing today with my hosts, BGS IBMOR. And we're going to do the same thing we did yesterday. We're going to play the audio recording and talk through it and discuss it. So here we go, ladies and gentlemen. Anything you want to say about this part, BGS, before we start?
No, it's you can. What it's going to tell you basically is a repeating pattern that they've seen uh, about all these cities and why all these things actually get started. So it's pretty much the conditions that people are put in,
Okay.
which is probably why they over the I think it was last summer why they spent so much money to prevent those conditions from popping back up.
Right. Most definitely. I mean,
Hmm.
human beings are human beings.
Hmm.
So
You see what happened at the Capitol Hill. They get fed up.
exactly. Exactly. All right. Here we go. Let me know if you guys can hear it.
Section
Can you
17
hear it?
Yeah.
of the Kerner
Okay.
Commission Report. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Report of the National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorders, Kerner Commission Report. Chapter 2, Patterns of Disorder. Introduction, the Pattern of Violence and Damage. Introduction. The President asked the Commission to answer several specific questions about the nature of riots, the kinds of communities in which they occurred, the characteristics, including age, education, and job history, of those who rioted and those who did not, the ways in which groups of lawful citizens can be encouraged to help cool the situation, the relative impact of various depressed conditions in the ghetto which stimulated people to riot, the impact of federal and other programs on those conditions, the effect on rioting of police-community relationships, the parts of the community which suffered the most as a result of the disorders. The profiles in the foregoing chapter portray the nature and extent of 10 of the disorders which took place during the summer of 1967. This chapter seeks, in these events and in the others which we surveyed, a set of common elements to aid in understanding what happened and in answering the President's questions. This chapter also considers certain popular conceptions about riots. Disorders are often discussed as if there were a single type. The typical riot of recent years is sometimes seen as a massive uprising against white people, involving widespread burning, looting, and sniping, either by all ghetto Negroes or by an uneducated Southern-born Negro underclass of habitual criminals or riffraff. An agitator at a protest demonstration, the coverage of events by the news media, or an isolated triggering or precipitating event is often identified as the primary spark of violence. The uniform set of stages is sometimes posited with a succession of confrontations and withdrawals by two cohesive groups, the police on one side and the riotous mob on the other.
Mm-hmm.
Often it is assumed that there was no effort within the Negro community to reduce the violence. Sometimes the only remedy prescribed is application of the largest possible police or control force as early as possible. What we have found does not validate these conceptions. We have been unable to identify constant patterns in all aspects of civil disorders. We have found that they are unusual, irregular, complex, and in the present state of knowledge, unpredictable social processes. Like many human events, they do not unfold in orderly sequences. Moreover, we have examined the 1967 disorders within a few months after their occurrence and under pressing time limitations. While we have collected information of considerable immediacy, analysis will undoubtedly improve with the passage and perspective of time and with the further accumulation and refinement of data. To facilitate further analysis, we have appended much of our data to this report. We have characterized the information now available about the 1967 disorders as follows. The pattern of violence over the nation, severity, location, timing, and number of people involved. The riot process in a sample of 24 disorders we have surveyed. Prior events, the development of violence, the various control efforts on the part of officials and the community, and the relationship between violence and control efforts. The riot participants, a comparison of rioters with those who sought to limit the disorder and with those who remained uninvolved. The setting in which the disorders occurred, social and economic conditions, local governmental structure, the scale of federal programs, and the grievance reservoir in the Negro community. The aftermath of disorder, the ways in which communities responded after order was restored in the streets. Based on information derived from our surveys, we offer the following generalizations. 1. No civil disorder was typical in all respects. Viewed in a national framework, the disorders of 1967 varied greatly in terms of violence and damage. While a relatively small number were major under our criteria and a somewhat larger number were serious, most of the disorders would have received little or no national attention as riots had the nation not been sensitized by the more serious outbreaks.
That's much because of the
2.
news media.
While the civil disorders of 1967 were racial in character, they were not interracial. The 1967 disorders, as well as earlier disorders of the recent period, involved action within Negro neighborhoods against symbols of white American society, authority, and property, rather than against white persons. 3. Despite extremist rhetoric, there was no attempt to subvert the social order of the United States. Instead, most of those who attacked white authority and property seemed to be demanding fuller participation in the social order and the material benefits enjoyed by the vast majority of American citizens. 4. Disorder did not typically erupt without pre-existing causes as a result of a single triggering or precipitating incident. Instead, it developed out of an increasingly disturbed social atmosphere, in which typically a series of tension-heightening incidents over a period of weeks or months became linked in the minds of many in the Negro community with a shared reservoir of underlying grievances. 5. There was, typically, a complex relationship between the series of incidents and the underlying grievances. For example, grievances about allegedly abusive police practices, unemployment and underemployment, housing, and other conditions in the ghetto were often aggravated in the minds of many Negroes by incidents involving the police or the inaction of municipal authorities on Negro complaints about police action, unemployment, inadequate housing, or other conditions. When grievance-related incidents recurred and rising tensions were not satisfactorily resolved, a cumulative process took place in which prior incidents were readily recalled and grievances reinforced. At some point in the mounting tension, a further incident, in itself often routine or even trivial, became the breaking point, and the tension spilled over into violence. 6. Many grievances in the Negro community resulted from the discrimination, prejudice, and powerlessness which Negroes often experience. They also result from the severely disadvantaged social and economic conditions of many Negroes as compared with those of whites in the same city, and more particularly, in the predominantly white suburbs. 7. Characteristically, the typical rioter was not a hoodlum, habitual criminal, or riffraff.
You don't say.
Nor was he a recent migrant, a member of an uneducated underclass, or a person lacking broad social and political concerns. Instead, he was a teenager or young adult, a lifelong resident of the city in which he rioted, a high school dropout, but somewhat better educated than his Negro neighbor, and almost invariably underemployed or employed in a menial job. He was proud of his race, extremely hostile to both whites and middle-class Negroes, and, though informed about politics, highly distrustful of the political system and of political leaders.
So that's like the space.
Numerous Negro
Bookies and the Ray Rays, yeah.
urging rioters to cool it. The typical counter-rioter resembled in many respects the majority of Negroes, who neither rioted nor took action against the rioters, that is, the uninvolved. But certain differences are crucial. The counter-rioter was better educated and had higher income than either the rioter or
Educated
the
land.
non-involved. 9. Negotiations between Negroes and white officials occurred during virtually all the disorders surveyed. The negotiations often involved young, militant Negroes as well as older, established leaders. Despite a setting of chaos and disorder, negotiations in many cases involved discussions of underlying grievances as well as the handling of the disorder by control authorities. 10. The chain we have identified discrimination, prejudice, disadvantaged conditions, intense and pervasive grievances, a series of tension heightening incidents, all culminating in the eruption of disorder at the hands of youthful, political aware activists, must be understood as describing the central trend in the disorders, not as an explanation of all aspects of the riots or of all rioters. Some rioters, for example, may have shared neither the conditions nor the grievances of their Negro neighbors. Some may have coolly and deliberately exploited the chaos created by others. Some may have been drawn into the melee merely because they identified with or wished to emulate others. Nor do we intend to suggest that the majority of the rioters who shared the adverse conditions and grievances necessarily articulated in their own minds the connection between that background and their actions. 11. The background of disorder in the riot cities was typically characterized by severely disadvantaged conditions for Negroes, especially as compared with those for whites, a local government often unresponsive to these conditions, federal programs which had not yet reached a significant large portion of those who need, and the resulting reservoir of pervasive and deep grievance and frustration in the ghetto. 12. In the immediate aftermath of disorder, the status quo of daily life before the disorder generally was quickly restored. Yet, despite some notable public and private efforts, little basic change took place in the conditions underlying the disorder. In some cases, the result was increased distrust between blacks and whites, diminished interracial communications, and growth of Negro and white extremist groups.
All right. So basically, because the government put forth this environment, this atmosphere that they created and for the Negro people, and put them into a box and pushed them down and down and down. This is just what happened in 1967, which is the straw that broke the camel's back. You just said fuck.
Well, yeah, it had been going on for a while, since the 50s.
But nothing. I don't think it was nothing that to this scale though.
Well, the thing is, you had got to remember, as the machines came in the South, right? There were no more jobs. Guess where the black folks from the South had to go? They had to go into the cities.
Yes, for prosperity. There was none.
There was none. So you're getting overcrowded conditions. You get increased competition for jobs. You get poor conditions. At some point it's going to explode, which it didn't.
Yeah, living in squalor. They want governments want taking care of the properties. Landlords gouging.
Taking advantage. Yep.
And then you got stores around there taking advantage of you. You living in and you couldn't get no justice. Get pulled out. Can't eat anywhere. Got to eat in the back of the building. Animal.
Down south. North was probably a little different but you couldn't get to those neighborhoods anyway. You weren't allowed. So and they said it here. Teenagers who were teenagers in the 60s. Mm-hmm.
Y'all was called like their boomers are bad.
They didn't see a future.
They didn't see a future. They didn't really have anything.
Mm-hmm.
So they rebelled, and look where we're at now. Yay, boomers! I'm sorry, I gotta put that in there. All right, let's continue. Unless you got something else to say about it.
No. Basically, those are the poverty. Which same thing. The Monahan report says poverty, lack of jobs, poor conditions, and then being mistreated. Over a number of years because mistreated by the police, mistreated by discriminated by landlords and people trying to hire you, even the stores. So eventually, it's going to blow, and it did.
All right, let's continue.
1. The pattern of violence and damage. Levels of violence and damage. Because definitions of civil disorder vary widely, between 51 and 217 disorders were recorded by various agencies as having occurred during the first 9 months of 1967. From these sources, we have developed a list of 164 disorders which occurred during that period. We have ranked them in 3 categories of violence and damage, utilizing such criteria as the degree and duration of violence, the number of active participants, and the level of law enforcement response. Major disorders. 8 disorders, 5% of the total, were major. They were characterized generally by a combination of the following factors. 1. Many fires, intensive looting, and reports of sniping. 2. Violence lasting more than 2 days. 3. Sizable crowds. And 4. Use of National Guard or federal forces as well as other control forces. Serious disorders. 33 disorders, 20% of the total, were serious but not major. These were characterized generally by 1. Isolated looting, some fires, and some rock throwing. 2. Violence lasting between 1 and 2 days. 3. Only one sizable crowd or many small groups. And 4. Use of state police, though generally not National Guard or federal forces. Minor disorders. 123 disorders, 75% of the total, were minor. These would not have been classified as riots or received wide press attention without national conditioning to a riot climate. They were characterized generally by 1. A few fires or broken windows. 2. Violence lasting generally less than 1 day. 3. Participation by only small numbers of people. And 4. Use, in many cases, only of local police or police from a neighboring community. 164 disorders which we have categorized occurred in 128 cities. 25, 20%, of the cities had 2 or more disturbances. New York had 5 separate disorders. Chicago had 4. 6 cities had 3, and 17 had 2. 2 cities which experienced a major disorder, Cincinnati and Tampa, had subsequent disorders. Cincinnati had 2 more. However, in these 2 cities, the later disorders were less serious than the earlier ones. In only 2 cities were later disorders more severe. 3 conclusions emerge from the data. The significance of the 1967 disorders cannot be minimized. The level of disorder was major or serious in terms of our criteria on 41 occasions in 39 cities. The level of disorder, however, has been exaggerated. 3/4 of the disorders were relatively minor and would not have been regarded as nationally newsworthy riots in prior years. The fact that a city had experienced disorder earlier in 1967 did not immunize it from further violence. Distribution in terms of time, area, and size of community. Time. In 1967, disorders occurred with increasing frequency as summer approached and tapered off as it waned. More than 60% of the 164 disorders occurred in July alone. Disorder by months and level.
This is a
Month,
graph.
January.
Can't-
Number of major disorders, none. Number of
Yeah,
serious disorders, none.
yeah. Basically, what they're saying
Disorders,
is that
one.
as you know, as they're reading it, basically, what he's saying is that there were way more incidents than the ones that actually hit the papers. We all know about the ones that hit the papers, the big ones. I think there was like
Yeah.
8 or 9 big ones. Okay, that really, started burning down buildings that made
Yeah.
national
Whole blocks
headlines,
and stuff.
whole
But
block stuff. And then you had the minor ones where you had it wasn't a riot, but it was like a protest or a disturbance.
they called it riots though. That needs
Yeah,
to
well,
be
yeah, they call them. Yeah, well, they did call them riots. And then you had a lot of the little bitty ones that didn't, that could be precursors. Like I remember the L.A. riot. They got started basically the same way by cops abusing people, and it was just one little block that started, and
yeah.
when people got out into the streets, and then it bloomed. The thing is, it caught fire. Even though you do have those happen all the times where you have a little disturbance, but the cops will come in and quiet it down. That's what
Yeah.
they're saying.
Yeah. And
Like a lot of those go unreported.
yeah, 'cause there's no way they reported on 164.
No, no. Well, the thing is, did they reach the level of a riot to
Yeah.
where you have to bring in troops or bring in state police to actually quiet it down?
Yeah, that's what it says number because you didn't have that many major. Most of these stuff were minor.
Yeah, most of the stuff were mine. Well, yeah, that would make sense.
Yeah. So let's continue.
1. Totals, 1. February. Number of major disorders,
He's gone
none.
through all that.
Number of serious disorders, none. Number of minor disorders, none. Total,
So
none.
let's-
Minor disorders, 11. Totals,
You
11.
probably can speed him up to
Total number of
1.25.
major disorders,
Yeah.
8. Total number of serious disorders, 33. Total number of minor disorders, 123.
You said
Totals,
1.25?
124.
Yeah, that should be. Yeah.
Area. The violence was not limited to any one section of the country. Disorders by region and level. Region. East. Number of major disorders, 3. Number of serious disorders, 10. Number of minor disorders, 44. Total, 35%. Region. Midwest. Number of major disorders, 4.
Yeah,
Number of
these are
serious
by
disorders, 11.
areas of
Number
the
of minor
regions of
disorders,
the United
44.
States.
Total,
Mhm.
36%.
Yeah.
Region. South and border. Number of major disorders,
East
1.
and Midwest.
Number of serious disorders, 7. Number of minor disorders, 19. Total, 16%. Region, West. Number of major disorders, none. Number of serious disorders, 5. Number of minor disorders, 16. Total, 13%. Total number of major disorders, 8. Total number of serious disorders, 33. Total number of minor disorders, 123.
Yeah.
Total, 100%. When timing and location are considered together, other relationships appear. 98 disorders can be grouped into 23 clusters, which consist of 2 or more disturbances occurring within 2 weeks and within a few hundred miles of each other. Clustering was particularly striking for 2 sets of cities. The first, centered on Newark, consisted of disorders in 14 New Jersey cities. The second, centered on Detroit, consisted of disturbances in 7 cities in Michigan and 1 in Ohio. Size of community. The violence was not limited to large cities. 7 of the 8 major disorders occurred in communities with populations of 250,000 or more, but 37, 23%, of the disorders reviewed occurred in communities with populations of 50,000 or less, and 67 disorders, 41%, occurred in communities with populations of 100,000 or less, including 9, about 22%, of the 41 serious or major disturbances.
That makes sense. More people.
Disorders by level and city population. City population in thousands. 0 to 50,000. Number of major disorders, 1. Number of serious disorders, 5. Number of minor disorders, 31. Total, 37. 50,000 to 100,000. Number of major disorders, none. Number of serious disorders, 3. Number of minor disorders, 27.
Let me speed
Total,
past this
30.
part.
100,000 to 250,000. Number of major disorders, none. Number of serious disorders, 8. Number of minor disorders, 23. Total, 31. 250,000 to 500,000. Number of major disorders, 5. Number of serious disorders, 10. Number of minor disorders, 15. Totals, 30. 50,000 to 1 million. Number of major disorders, 1. Number of serious disorders, 4. Number of minor disorders, 10. Totals, 15. Over 1 million. Number of major disorders, 1. Number of serious disorders, 3. Number of minor disorders, 13. Totals, 17. Total number of major disorders, 8. Total number of serious disorders, 33. Total number of minor disorders, 119. Totals, 160. Death, injury, and damage. In its study of 75 disturbances in 67 cities, the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations of the Senate Committee on Government Operations.
So you sound like the micro machine man just there.
And 1,000 deaths occurred in 12 of these disturbances. More than 80% of the deaths and more than half the injuries occurred in Newark and Detroit. In more than 60% of the disturbances, no deaths and no more than 10 injuries were reported. Substantial damage to property also tended to be concentrated in a relatively small number of cities. Of the disorders which the Commission surveyed, significant damage resulted in Detroit, 40 to 45 million, Newark, 10.2 million, and Cincinnati, more than 1 million. In each of 9 cities, damage was estimated at less than $100,000. Fire caused extensive damage in Detroit and Cincinnati, 2 of the 3 cities which suffered the greatest destruction of property. Newark had relatively little loss from fire, but extensive inventory loss from looting and damage to stock. Damage estimates made at the time of the Newark and Detroit disorders were later greatly reduced. Early estimates in Newark ranged from 15 to 25 million. A month later, the estimate was revised to 10.2 million. In Detroit, newspaper damage estimates at first ranged from 200 million to 500 million. The highest recent estimate is $45 million. What we have said should not obscure 3 important factors. First, the dollar cost of the disorders should be increased by the extraordinary administrative expenses of municipal, state, and federal governments. Second, deaths and injuries are not the sole measures of the cost of civil disorders in human terms. For example, the cost of dislocation of people, though clearly not quantifiable in dollars and cents, was a significant factor in Detroit, the one case in which many residences were destroyed. Other human costs, fear, distrust, and alienation, were incurred in every disorder. Third, even a relatively low level of violence and damage in absolute terms may seriously disrupt a small or medium-sized community.
Yeah, because you got to move all those people
Victims
out.
of violence.
Yeah, if you
82
burn down a house,
persons
wreck your
fatalities.
houses, yeah.
Yeah. So, and then also too, the newspapers saying that it costs more to fix it than what was actually estimated.
Yeah, 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 and basically the income, the property, and then the merchandise and stuff like that from lootings and stuff like that, and then the loss of jobs. They can't make any money. They can't hire people. So
Mm. All right. Let's go to victims of violence.
5 disorders studied by the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, about 10% were public officials, primarily law officers and firemen. Among the injured, public officials made up 38%. The overwhelming majority of the civilians killed and injured were Negroes. Retail businesses suffered a much larger proportion of the damage during the disorders than public
mhm.
institutions, industrial properties, or private residences. In Newark, 1,029 establishments, affecting some 4,492 employers and employees, suffered damage to buildings or loss of inventory, or both. Those which suffered the greatest loss through looting, in descending order of loss, were liquor, clothing, and furniture stores.
Liquor,
White-owned businesses
Yeah.
are widely
Hey, why
believed to have
not
been
get drunk?
damaged the most.
liquor, clothing, and furniture stores. Sounds like
Each
a
time
black
that has
area.
been studied, the
Yep.
damage seems to have been, at least in part, the result of deliberate attacks on white-owned businesses characterized in the Negro community as unfair or disrespectful towards Negroes. Not all the
I mean, it would make sense because that's usually what's in our area. It's
Hmm.
liquor, clothing, and furniture stores. Furniture stores put you on loans that you can't pay off. Like
Hmm.
what's the famous ones like
Oh,
Aaron's?
oh yeah, 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 yeah. The layaways or the payday. Was it rent to
Uh,
own stuff like
yeah,
stuff? Yeah.
rent the own places where you have to
Hmm.
rent your furniture because
Yep.
those stuff was targeted towards blacks,
Hmm.
and they took advantage of us. That's why most black people, when they still go to renter centers or rent to own
Hmm.
places, they don't like doing it. And I've always heard, don't go there because you can waste your money.
Yeah, you do waste your money. Yeah.
Yeah, because they're gonna cost something that costs like $500 end up costing you like 1,200.
Hmm. Hmm.
Doesn't make any sense.
They had to do that for a girlfriend of mine. She wanted to go to rent to own. So that's to find out how much they're going to charge her. I said, let's go to it was a price club back then. So let's go to Costco's
Mm-hmm.
to get the same thing
Exactly.
for a TV and a VCR. So, come on.
Mm-hmm. So still going on to this day, even though I don't think they're as popular as right now.
No, no. Well, not with cheap Chinese goods. No.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't think we even make the stuff in the United States anymore. Half the stuff we don't even make made someplace else.
Yeah, I think there was only one TV place in America left, but I think they
No,
went.
they don't make no. With Curtis Mather was the last TV made in America, and then they all TVs are made in either Korea, Taiwan, or mainland China.
Yeah, I think there
They-
was. I think there was one that was trying to make it, but then they switched over to China and said, "Fuck it."
Yes, it's yeah the basically we don't have the technology anymore, and plus our the cost of labor is too high. Most like I say most TVs are actually made in either Korea or Taiwan.
Yeah. L Spain says Renner Center does car tires. Wow.
Ah! Oh, they've been doing car tires. Yeah, they've been
And
doing car
rims.
tires and rims. Yeah,
Yeah, I've
yeah,
seen
all the big
rims.
flashy rims. Yeah, they were paying. They were actually renting them back in the
Mm.
day.
Mm. They're gonna get you one way or another. All right, let's continue.
illicit damage was purposeful or was caused by rioters. Some was a byproduct of violence. In certain instances, police and fire department control efforts caused damage. The New Jersey Commission on Civil Disorders has found that in Newark, retributive action was taken against Negro-owned properties by control forces. Some damage was accidental. In Detroit, some fire damage, especially to residences, may have been caused primarily by a heavy wind. Public institutions generally were not targets of serious attacks, but police and fire equipment was damaged in at least 15 of the 23 cities. Of the cities surveyed, significant damage to residences occurred only in Detroit. In at least 9 of the 22 other cities, there was minor damage to residences, often resulting from fires in adjacent businesses. End of section 17. Recording by Todd.
Section 18 of the Kerner Commission Report. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Eric Evans, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Report of the National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorders, Kerner Commission Report. Chapter 2, Patterns of disorder. The riot process. The Commission has found no typical disorder in 1967 in terms of intensity of violence and extensiveness of damage. To determine whether, as is sometimes suggested, there was a typical riot process, we examined 24 disorders which occurred during 1967 in 20 cities and 3 university settings. We've concentrated on 4 aspects of that process: the accumulating reservoir of grievances in the Negro community, precipitating incidents and their relationship to the reservoir of grievances, the development of violence after its initial outbreak, the control effort, including official force, negotiation, and persuasion. We found a common social process operating in all 24 disorders in certain critical respects. These events developed similarly over a period of time and out of an accumulation of grievances and increasing tension in the Negro community. Almost invariably, they exploded in ways related to the local community and its particular problems and conflicts. But once violence erupted, there began a complex interaction of many elements: rioters, official control forces, counter-rioters, in which the differences between various disorders were more pronounced than the similarities. The reservoir of grievances in the Negro community. Our examination of the background of the surveyed disorders revealed a typical pattern of deeply held grievances, which were widely shared by many members of the Negro community. The specific content of the expressed grievances varied somewhat from city to city, but in general, grievances among Negroes in all the cities related to prejudice, discrimination, severely disadvantaged living conditions, and a general sense of frustration about their inability to change those conditions. Specific events or incidents exemplified and reinforced the shared sense of grievance. News of such incidents spread quickly throughout the community and added to the reservoir. Grievances about police practices, unemployment and underemployment, housing, and other objective conditions in the ghetto were aggravated in the minds of many Negroes by the inaction of municipal authorities. Out of this reservoir of grievance and frustration, the riot process began in the cities which we surveyed. Precipitating incidents. In virtually every case, a single triggering or precipitating incident can be identified as having immediately preceded, within a few hours and in generally the same location, the outbreak of disorder. But this incident was usually a relatively minor, even trivial one, by itself substantially disproportionate to the scale of violence that followed. Often it was an incident of a type which had occurred frequently in the same community in the past without provoking violence. We found that violence was generated by an increasingly disturbed social atmosphere, in which typically not one, but a series of incidents occurred over a period of weeks or months prior to the outbreak of disorder.
Yep.
Most cities had 3 or more such incidents. Houston had 10 over a 5-month period. These earlier or prior incidents were linked in the minds of many Negroes to the pre-existing reservoir of underlying grievances. With each such incident, frustration and tension grew until at some point a final incident, often similar to the incidents preceding it, occurred and was followed almost immediately by violence.
George Floyd, anybody?
The prior incidents
Yeah,
and the reservoir of underlying
Started
grievances
broke their camel's
contributed to
back.
a cumulative process of mounting tension that spilled over into violence when the final incident occurred. In this sense, the entire chain, the grievances, the series of prior tension-heightening incidents, and the final incident, was the precipitant of disorder. This chain describes the central trend in the disorders we surveyed, and not necessarily all aspects of the riots or of all rioters. For example, incidents have not always increased tension, and tension has not always resulted in violence. We conclude only that both processes did occur in the disorders we examined. Similarly, we do not suggest that all rioters shared the conditions or the grievances of their Negro neighbors. Some may deliberately have exploited the chaos created out of the frustration of others. Some may have been drawn into the melee merely because they identified with or wished to emulate others. Some who shared the adverse conditions and grievances did not riot. We found that the majority of the rioters did share the adverse conditions and grievances, although they did not necessarily articulate in their own minds the connection between that background and their actions. Newark and Detroit presented typical sequences of prior incidents: a buildup of tensions, a final incident, and the outbreak of violence.
Yeah, so it's like I said, a chain of events that led it, and then there was one event that broke the camel's back.
Yeah, it normally is. It's like a volcano.
Yeah.
You get to build up until it finally blows. And they found that out in all, even the small disturbances, the same thing.
Yeah, there's always something leading up to it. There's sort of the underlying issue that everybody's feeling, and then just said, "Nah, fuck this."
Yeah, and with the bigger ones, you see a lot of the little small disturbances before you see the big one. Almost like an earthquake.
Yep.
Feel the tremors first.
All right, I guess I'm going to Newark.
Newark. Prior incidents. 1965. A Newark policeman shot and killed an 18-year-old Negro boy. After the policeman had stated that he had fallen and his gun had discharged accidentally, he later claimed that the youth had assaulted another officer and was shot as he fled. At a hearing, it was decided that the patrolman had not used excessive force.
That sounds familiar.
It does it not.
Source of irritation in the Negro community. April 1967. Approximately 15 Negroes were arrested while picketing a grocery store which they claimed sold bad meat and used unfair credit practices. Late May, early June. Negro leaders had for several months voiced.
Yeah, see, boomers were dealing with this stuff as children and their parents.
And all those good black businesses that people brag about that. See, those are the ones that said, "Well, we had our own." Yeah, we did. The things. That's why they were protesting.
Yeah, they were selling the bad meat to the Negroes.
Yeah, they're selling the used meat that the white folks, white stores actually were getting rid of.
It was like, oh, this meat's gone bad. Let's sell it to these black people over here.
Yeah. They'll eat it. They'll figure out how to eat it.
Honestly, I'm just not thinking about this. This is probably why a lot of your older folks were really involved with deep freezers, because you don't see too many people with deep freezers. I used to see deep freezers all the time with the older folks.
Yeah, deep freezers, and also you notice the difference. How say it's a beef or chicken or some kind of meat. You notice white folks don't cook the food as well as we do, right? There's a reason for that. Basically, there was a lot more chances of you getting some kind of toxin in your meat. So the best way to actually overcome that, if you got to eat, is do what? Overcook it. So that the white, black folks, man, if it looks at the least bit like it's not cooked, guess what we do? No, you got to send that back. Yeah, you will burn it. Yeah, black folks really do burn it. You take a steak, man. It took me a long time to eat a medium, well done steak, because I was trained that it's got to be burnt.
It's got to be cooked all the way.
It got to way through. Yeah.
Yeah,
but there was a reason for that, because because we did get substandard food.
I hate well done steak.
Yeah, well, but then you grew up on it, didn't you? Did your folks cook everything well done?
We didn't really eat steak like that.
Okay.
As a kid, most of the stuff we just ate, like hamburger meat and basic stuff. As far as like getting like a steak, everybody cook steak. Like, nah.
Okay.
I didn't start eating steak till I was like in my 20s. To be honest with you, we had country fried steak, but that's something different.
Yeah, you notice the country fried steak. It's well done. It's overdone.
Yeah, but it's good with some gravy on it though.
Well done steak. Yeah, well done steak has no taste, but the thing is that they doctor it. So if you get a well done steak but cooked by black folks, it's doctored. It's got they season it, so it's seasoned to make it taste like something. But the thing is that if you get steak that may not be fresh or might be a little bit tainted, you better cook that bad boy. Otherwise, you're gonna have a trip to the hospital.
Yeah, that is true. All right, let's continue.
Strong opposition to a proposed medical dental center to be built on 150 acres of land in the predominantly Negro Central Ward. The dispute centered mainly around the lack of relocation provisions for those who would be displaced by the medical center. The issue became extremely volatile in late May when public blight hearings were held regarding the land to be condemned. The hearings became a public forum in which many residents spoke against the proposed center. The city did not change its plan. Late May, June. The mayor recommended appointment of a white city councilman who had no more than a high school education to the position of secretary to the Board of Education. Reportedly, there was widespread support from both whites and Negroes for a Negro candidate who held a master's degree and was considered more qualified. The mayor did not change his
Oh my goodness.
Ultimately, the original secretary retained his position and neither candidate was appointed.
What was that video you just did yesterday and Charles introduced?
About about all the jobs and they're not hiring black men,
even though they're educated. Sounds kind of racist to me. Just saying.
Charles Irby says that still burn my steak. It's a habit. It's what we learned. Yeah,
it is. But yeah, that still goes on to this day. Even though you qualified, you're still getting Get the shaft.
Mm-hmm.
July 8, several Newark policemen, allegedly including the patrolman involved in the 1965 killing, entered East Orange to assist the East Orange police during an altercation with a group of Negro men. Final incident, July 12, approximately 9:30 p.m. A Negro cab driver was injured during or after a traffic arrest in the heart of the Central Ward. Word spread quickly, and a crowd gathered in front of the 4th Precinct Station House across the street from a large public housing project. Initial violence. Same day, approximately 11:30 p.m. The crowd continued to grow until it reached 300 to 500 people. 1 or 2 Molotov cocktails were thrown at the station house.
Wow.
Shortly after midnight, the police dispersed the crowd, and window breaking and looting began a few minutes later. By about 1 a.m., the peak level of violence for the first night was reached. Detroit. Prior incidents. August 1966. A crowd formed during a routine arrest of several Negro youths in the Kirchville section of the city. Tensions were high for several hours, but no serious violence occurred. June 1967. A Negro prostitute was shot to death on her front steps. Rumors in the Negro community attributed the killing to a vice squad officer.
Oh,
Police
my goodness.
investigation later reportedly unearthed leads to a disgruntled pimp. No arrests were made.
Mm.
June 26th. A young Negro man on a picnic was shot to death while reportedly trying to protect his pregnant wife from assault by 7 white youths.
Mm.
The wife witnessed the slaying and miscarried shortly thereafter.
Mm.
Of the white youths, only 1 was charged. The others were released. Final incident. July 23, approximately 3:45 a.m. Police raided a Blind Pig, a type of nightclub in the Negro area which served drinks after hours. 80 persons were in the club, more than the police had anticipated.
You know what? That still goes on. To
They
this
ain't never
day.
stop.
They
Yeah.
ain't never
Yeah. Yeah. After hours club.
Yeah, the liquor houses.
The liquor houses. Yep.
If you go outside, you can't come back in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. Gin joint. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
A party for several servicemen, 2 of whom had recently returned from Vietnam. A crowd of about 200 persons gathered as the police escorted the patrons into the police wagons. Initial violence, approximately 5 a.m. As the last police cars drove away from the Blind Pig, the crowd began to throw rocks. By 8 a.m., looting had become widespread. Violence continued to increase throughout the day, and by evening reached a peak level for the first day. In the 24 disorders surveyed, the events identified as tension-heightening incidents, whether prior or final, involved issues which generally paralleled the grievances we found in these cities. The incidents identified were of the following types. Police actions. Some 40% of the prior incidents involved allegedly abusive or discriminatory police actions. Most of the police incidents began routinely and involved a response to, at most, a few persons rather than a large group. A typical incident occurred in Bridgeton, New Jersey, 5 days before the disturbance when 2 police officers went to the home of a young Negro man to investigate a non-support complaint. A fight ensued when the officers attempted to take the man to the police station, and the Negro was critically injured and partially paralyzed. A Negro minister representing the injured man's family asked for suspension of the 2 officers involved pending investigation. This procedure had been followed previously when 3 policemen were accused of collusion in the robbery of a white-owned store. The Negro's request was not granted. Police actions were also identified as the final incident preceding 12 of the 24 disturbances. Again, in all but 2 cases, the police action which became the final incident began routinely. The final incident in Grand Rapids occurred when police attempted to apprehend a Negro driving an allegedly stolen car. A crowd of 30 to 40 Negro spectators gathered. The suspect had 1 arm in a cast, and some of the younger Negroes in the crowd intervened because they thought the police were handling him too roughly. Protest activities. Approximately 22% of the prior incidents involved Negro demonstrations, rallies, and protest meetings. Only 5 involved appearances by nationally known Negro militants. Protest rallies and meetings were also identified as the final incident preceding 5 disturbances. Nationally known Negro militants spoke at 2 of these meetings, and the other 3 only local leaders were involved. A prior incident involving alleged police brutality was the principal subject of each of 3 rallies. Inaction of municipal authorities was the topic for 2 other meetings. White racist activities. About 17% of the prior incidents involved activities by whites intended to discredit or intimidate Negroes or violence by whites against Negroes. These included some 15 cross burnings in Bridgeton, the harassment of Negro college students by white teenagers in Jackson, Mississippi, and in Detroit, the slaying of a Negro by a group of white youths. No final incidents were classifiable as racist activity. Previous disorders in the same city. In this category were approximately 16% of the prior incidents, including 7 previous disorders, the handling of which had produced a continuing sense of grievance. There were other incidents, usually of minor violence, which occurred prior to 7 disorders and were seen by the Negro community as precursors of the subsequent disturbance. Typically, In Plainfield, the night before the July disorder, a Negro youth was injured in an altercation between white and Negro teenagers. Tensions rose as a result. No final incidents were identified in this category. Disorders in other cities. Local media coverage and rumors generated by the Newark and Detroit riots were specifically identified as prior incidents in 4 cases. However, these major disorders appeared to be important factors in all the disorders which followed them. Media coverage and rumors generated by the major riots in nearby Newark and Plainfield were the only identifiable final incidents preceding 5 nearby disorders. In these cases, there was a substantial mobilization of police and extensive patrolling of the ghetto area in anticipation of violence. Official city actions. Approximately 14% of the prior incidents were identified as action, or in some cases, inaction of city officials other than police or the judiciary. Typically, in Cincinnati, 2 months prior to the disturbance, approximately 200 representatives, mostly Negroes, of the inner-city community councils sought to appear before the city council to request summer recreation funds. The council permitted only one person from the group to speak, and then only briefly, on the ground that the group had not followed the proper procedure for placing the issue on the agenda. No final incidents were identified in this category. Administration of justice. 8 of the prior incidents involved cases of allegedly discriminatory administration of justice. Typical was a case in Houston a month and a half before the disorder. 3 civil rights advocates were arrested for leading a protest and for their participation in organizing a boycott of classes at the predominantly Negro Texas Southern University. Bond was set at $25,000 each. The court refused for several days to reduce bond, even though TSU officials dropped the charges they had originally pressed. There were no final incidents identified involving the administration of justice. In a unique case in New Haven, the shooting of a Puerto Rican by a white man was identified as the final incident before violence. Finally, we have noted a marked relationship between prior and final incidents within each city. In most of the cities surveyed, the final incident was of the same type as one or more of the prior incidents. For example, police actions were identified as both the final incident and one or more prior incidents preceding 7 disturbances. Rallies or meetings to protest police actions
Sounds like
involved in
today.
the prior incident were identified as the final incident preceding 3 additional disturbances. The cumulative reinforcement of grievances and heightening of tensions found in all instances were particularly evident in these cases.
That's why they still use the stuff from the Kerner Commission today.
Incidents culminated in violence. The riot process did not follow a uniform pattern in the 24 disorders surveyed. However, some similarities emerge. The final incident before the outbreak of disorder and the initial violence itself generally occurred at a time and place in which it was normal for many people to be on the streets. In most of the 24 disorders, groups generally estimated at 50 or more persons were on the street at the time and place of the first outbreak. In all 24 disturbances, including the 3 university-related disorders, the initial disturbance area consisted of streets with relatively high concentrations of pedestrian and automobile traffic at the time. In all but 2 cases, Detroit and Milwaukee, violence started between 7 p.m. and 12:30 a.m., when the largest number of pedestrians could be expected. 10 of the 24 disorders erupted on Friday night, Saturday, or Sunday. In most instances, the temperature during the day on which violence first erupted was quite high. This contributed to the size of the crowds on the street, particularly in areas of congested housing. Major violence occurred in all 24 disorders during the evening and night hours, between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m., and in most cases, between 9 p.m. and 3 a.m. In only a few disorders, including Detroit and Newark, did substantial violence occur or continue during the daytime. Generally, the night-day cycles continued in daily succession through the early period of the disorder. At the beginning of disorder, violence generally flared almost immediately after the final precipitating incident. It then escalated quickly to its peak level in the case of one-night disorders and to the first night peak in the case of continuing disorders. In Detroit and Newark, the first outbreaks began within 2 hours and reached severe, although not the highest levels, within 3 hours. In almost all of the subsequent night-day cycles, the change from relative order to a state of disorder by a number of people typically occurred extremely rapidly, within 1 or 2 hours at the most. 19 of the surveyed disorders lasted more than 1 night. In 10 of these, violence peaked on the first night, and the level of activity on subsequent nights was the same or less. In the other 9 disturbances, however, the peak was reached on a subsequent night. Disorder generally began with less serious violence against property, such as rock and bottle throwing and window breaking. These were usually the materials and targets closest to hand at the place of the initial outbreak. Once store windows were broken, looting usually followed. Whether fires were set only after looting occurred is unclear. Reported instances of firebombing and Molotov cocktails in the 24 disorders appeared to occur as frequently during one cycle of violence as during another in disorders which continued through more than one cycle. However, fires seemed to break out more frequently during the middle cycles of riots lasting several days. Gunfire and sniping were also reported more frequently during the middle cycles. The control effort.
I don't know if you've probably seen it, but there was during the riots or disturbances you were going to say about last year, right? Did you see the guy that broke into the gym and went to go exercise? He was on the treadmill. He broke the windows to go inside the like a Planet Fitness or something. Went on a treadmill. They recorded him.
Oh, good grief! Yeah, he was. He was high.
Yeah, I was like, really?
Yeah, he was high. He was on something.
But yeah, I mean, it makes sense though. If you got more people on the street and then something happens, then guess
Hmm.
what? People will start going to get into it, and then it's just going to erupt and keep getting bigger and bigger to be able to control it.
Yeah, yeah. The more basically the people that are, you know, if you can't get it under a certain type of control, then the people that are on the fence, on the borderline, will actually start participating. Like I
Hmm.
said, like even during the report, they said some of the rioters were actually serious, right? And then some of them were just, taking advantage of the situation, just
Yeah,
doing out of opportunity, which that's where all the looting and stuff like that come in.
yeah. Then that's what they're there for. I mean,
Yeah,
that happens in all riots.
yeah, yeah. You have a breakdown of civil order.
Hmm. Then you have people to come in and just be like, "Well, shit, I'm going to use this to my advantage."
Well,
And
yeah, might as well. I always wanted that big screen TV.
hmm. All right, let's see. Well, let's go to 3. The right participant. That should be around here.
Without the participation of local officials. Employees of community action agencies occasionally participated, either as intermediaries or as participants. In some cases, they provided the meeting place. No uniform result from utilizing any of the 3 control approaches is apparent. In at least half of the 24 cases, it can reasonably be said that the approach taken by the police failed to prevent the continuation of violence. To the extent that their effectiveness is measurable, the conclusion appears to hold for subsequent police control responses as well. There is also evidence in some instances of over-response in subsequent cycles of violence. The various tactical responses we have described are not mutually exclusive, and in many instances, combinations were employed. The most common were attempts at dispersal in the disturbance area and a simultaneous cordon or barricade at the routes leading from the disturbance area to the central commercial area of the city, either to contain the disturbance or to prevent persons outside the area from entering it, or both. In 11 disorders, a curfew was imposed at some time, either as the major dispersal technique or in combination with other techniques. In only 4 disorders was tear gas used at any point as a dispersal technique. Only Newark and New Haven used a combination of all 3 means of control: cordon, curfew, and tear gas.
We had that
Supplemental official force.
curfew over here.
In 9
Yeah,
disturbances involving a wide variation in the intensity of violence, additional control forces were brought in after there had been serious violence which local police had been unable to handle alone.
that's where they learned about the
In every
curfew.
case, further violence
Yeah.
occurred, often more than once and often of equal or greater intensity than before. The result was the same when extra forces were mobilized before serious violence. In 4 cities where this was done, violence nonetheless occurred, in most cases more than once, and often of equal or greater intensity than in the original outbreak. In the remaining group of 7 cities, no outside control forces were called, because the level and duration of violence were lower. Outbreaks in these cities nevertheless followed the same random pattern as in the cities which used outside forces. Negotiation. In 21 of the 24 disturbances surveyed, discussion or negotiation occurred during the disturbance. These took the form of relatively formal meetings between government officials and Negroes, during which grievances and issues were discussed and means were sought to restore order. Such meetings were usually held either immediately before or soon after the outbreak of violence. Meetings often continued beyond the first or second day of the disorder, and in a few instances, through the entire period of the disorder. The Negro participants in these meetings usually were established leaders in the Negro community, such as city councilmen or members of human relations commissions, ministers or officers of civil rights or other community organizations. However, Negro youths participated in over 1/3 of these meetings. In a few disorders, both youths and adult Negro leaders participated, sometimes without the participation of local officials. Employees of community action agencies occasionally participated, either as intermediaries or as participants. In some cases, they provided the meeting place. Discussions usually included issues generated by the disorder itself, such as the treatment by the police of those arrested. In 12 cases, prior ghetto grievances, such as unemployment and inadequate recreational facilities, were included as subjects. Often both disorder-related and prior grievances were discussed, with the focus generally shifting from the former to the latter as the disorder continued. How effective these meetings were is, as in the case of forcible response, impossible to gauge. Again, much depends on who participated, timing, and other responses being made at the same time. Counter rioters. In all but 6 of the 24 disorders, Negro private citizens were active on the streets attempting to restore order primarily by means of persuasion. In a Detroit survey of riot areas, residents over the age of 15, some 14% stated that they had been active as counter-rioters. Counter-rioters sometimes had some form of official recognition from either the mayor or a human relations council.
At the
Police
age of
reaction in
15.
these cases varied from total opposition to close cooperation. In most cases, some degree of official authorization was given before the activity of the counter-rioters began, and in a smaller number of cases, their activity was not explicitly authorized, but merely condoned by the authorities. Distinctive insignia were worn by the officially recognized counter-rioters in at least a few cities. In Dayton and Tampa, the white helmets issued to the counter-rioters have made the name white hats synonymous with counter-rioters. Public attention has centered on the officially recognized counter-rioters. However, counter-rioters are known to have acted independently, without official recognition, in a number of cities. Counter-rioters generally included young men, ministers, community action agency and other anti-poverty workers, and well-known ghetto residents. Their usual technique was to walk through the disturbance area urging people to cool it, although they often took other positive action as well, such as distributing food. How effective the counter-rioters were is difficult to estimate. Authorities in several cities indicated that they believed they were helpful. End of section.
All right, we're going to go through this third part, and that's going to be it. And then whatever's left that I feel like is important, I'm going to make videos of.
Okay.
Because I know you're busy at the moment, so. I don't want to take away from your time, sir. All right, so we're going to go through this on riot participant, and then after that, I'm going to make a video on the last couple of parts that I'm going to bring out, so.
Section 8.
Yeah, a lot of this stuff is going to repeat itself because it's on.
Yeah. Now go ahead.
No, a lot of stuff. A lot of the stuff is going to repeat itself about the riots and stuff like that. That's like their summary was actually pretty good.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
Section 19 of the Kerner Commission Report. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Report of the National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorders, Kerner Commission Report. Chapter 2, Patterns of Disorder. The riot participant. It is sometimes assumed that the rioters were criminal types, overactive social deviants or riffraff, recent migrants, members of an uneducated underclass, alienated from responsible Negroes, and without broad social or political concerns. It is often implied that there was no effort within the Negro community to attempt to reduce the violence. We have obtained data on participation from 4 different sources. Eyewitness accounts from more than 1,200 interviews in our staff reconnaissance survey of 20 cities, interview surveys based on probability samples of riot area residents in the 2 major riot cities, Detroit and Newark, designed to elicit anonymous self-identification of participants as rioters, counter-rioters, or not involved, arrest records from 22 cities, and a special study of arrestees in Detroit. Only partial information is available on the total numbers of participants. In the Detroit survey, approximately 11% of the sampled residents over the age of 15 in the 2 disturbance areas admittedly participated in rioting. Another 20 to 25% admitted to having been bystanders, but claimed that they had not participated. Approximately 16% claimed they had engaged in counter-riot activity, and the largest proportion, 48 to 53%, claimed they were at home or elsewhere and did not participate. However, a large proportion of the Negro community apparently believed that more was gained than lost through rioting, according to the Newark and Detroit surveys. Greater precision is possible in describing the characteristics of those who participated. We have combined the data from the 4 sources to construct a profile of the typical rioter and to compare him with the counter-rioter and the non-involved. The profile of a rioter. The typical rioter in the summer of 1967 was a Negro, unmarried male between the ages of 15 and 24. He was in many ways very different from the stereotype. He was not a migrant. He was born in the state and was a lifelong resident of the city in which the riot took place. Economically, his position was about the same as his Negro neighbors who did not actively participate in the riot. Although he had not, usually, graduated from high school, he was somewhat better educated than the average inner-city Negro, having at least attended high school for a time. Nevertheless, he was more likely to be working in a menial or low-status job as an unskilled laborer. If he was employed, he was not working full-time, and his employment was frequently interrupted by periods of unemployment. He feels strongly that he deserves a better job and that he is barred from achieving it, not because of lack of training, ability, or ambition, but because of discrimination by employers.
Mm-hmm.
He rejects the white bigot stereotype of the Negro as ignorant and shiftless. He takes great pride in his race and believes that in some respects, Negroes are superior to whites. He is extremely hostile to whites, but his hostility is more apt to be a product of social and economic class than of race. He is almost equally hostile toward middle-class Negroes. He is substantially better informed about politics than Negroes who were not involved in the riots. He is more likely to be actively engaged in civil rights efforts, but is extremely distrustful of the political system and of political leaders. The profile of the counter-rioter. The typical counter-rioter, who risked injury and arrest to walk the streets urging rioters to cool it, was an active supporter of existing social institutions. He was, for example, far more likely than either the rioter or the non-involved to feel that this country is worth defending in a major war. His actions and his attitudes reflected his substantially greater stake in the social system. He was considerably better educated and more affluent than either the rioter or the non-involved. He was somewhat more likely than the rioter, but less likely than the non-involved, to have been a migrant. In all other respects, he was identical to the non-involved. Characteristics of participants. Race. Of the arrestees, 83% were Negroes, 15% were whites. Our interviews in 20 cities indicated that almost all rioters were Negroes. Age. The survey data from Detroit, the arrest records, and our interviews in 20 cities all indicate that the rioters were late teenagers or young adults. In the Detroit survey, 61.3% of the self-reported rioters were between the ages of 15 and 24, and 86.3% were between 15 and 35. The arrest data indicate that 52.5% of the arrestees were between 15 and 24, and 80.8% were between 15 and 35. Of the non-involved, by contrast, only 22.6% in the Detroit survey were between 15 and 24, and 38.3% were between 15 and 35. Sex. In the Detroit survey, 61.4% of the self-reported rioters were male. Arrestees, however, were almost all male, 89.3%. Our interviews in 20 cities indicate that the majority of rioters were male. The large difference in proportion between the Detroit survey data and the arrestee figures probably reflects either selectivity in the arrest process or less dramatic, less provocative riot behavior by women.
Yeah.
Family
Yeah.
structure.
Why you think they put forth more of the money towards the women? Because they knew they weren't going to riot.
Oh, that and they don't, even when women protest. Well, a number of women are probably not as violent, but when women protest, they don't go after the women; they go after the men.
Yeah. And this doesn't show any women weren't riding either. So where were they at?
They said they were out there, but they're talking about the percentage
Yeah,
of the one being arrested. Small percentage of women actually got arrested.
but not enough.
Yeah, well, different age though.
Newark
Yeah.
survey,
That's before
Detroit
feminism.
arrest study, and arrest records from 4 cities indicated that
They're just lucky I won out there. I would have took everybody. All right, let's
see for
continue.
rioters to be single. The Newark survey indicates that rioters were single, 56.2%, more often than the non-involved, 49.6%. The Newark survey also indicates that rioters were more likely to have been divorced or separated, 14.2%, than the non-involved, 6.4%. However, the arrest records from 4 cities indicate that only a very small percentage of those arrested fall into this category. In regard to the structure of the family in which he was raised, the self-reported rioter, according to the Newark survey, was not significantly different from many of his Negro neighbors who did not actively participate in the riot. 25.5% of the self-reported rioters and 23% of the non-involved were brought up in homes where no adult male lived. Region
No.
Both survey data and arrest records.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say how things don't change, huh?
No male figures. So
No male figures, yeah.
and this is the time during when they were kicking the males out of the house.
Those areas, yeah, there was, in high inner city areas like that, you had a lot of baby mamas. I think it wasn't as bad as it is now, but it was like 30%.
Was this the time when they were during the welfare where they said the male couldn't live in the house?
Yeah, no man, the no man in the house rule, yeah.
Yeah. So that's probably why. Cause I do remember in that Pure Code projects, they said that was a major thing. Like guys had to hide underneath the beds or hide in the closet.
Oh
yeah.
It was welfare was actually intended for widows at first, and then I think basically it was FDR changed it to if your husband had abandoned you.
Yeah. Yep. So,
But they make exception for white people and not for us. So
yeah. So yeah, this is the result.
Demonstrate unequivocally.
Unbalanced male youth
mm-hmm.
that will go out and do stuff.
That those brought up in the region in which the riot occurred are much more likely to have participated in the riots. The percentage of self-reported rioters brought up in the North is almost identical for the Detroit survey, 74.4%, and the Newark survey, 74%. By contrast, of the non-involved, 36% in Detroit and 52.4% in Newark were brought up in the region in which the disorder occurred. Data available from 5 cities on the birthplace of arrestees indicate that 63% of the arrestees were born in the North. Although birthplace is not necessarily identical with place of upbringing, the data are sufficiently similar to provide strong support for the conclusion. Of the self-reported counter-rioters, however, 47.5% were born in the North, according to the Detroit survey, a figure which places them between self-reported rioters and the non-involved. Apparently, a significant consequence of growing up in the South is the tendency toward non-involvement in a riot situation, while involvement in a riot, either in support of or against existing social institutions, was more common among those born in the North.
Damn Yankees.
Residents. Rioters are not only more likely than the non-involved to have been born in the region in which the riot occurred, but they are also more likely to have been long-term residents of the city in which the disturbance took place. The Detroit survey data indicate that 59.4% of the self-reported rioters, but only 34.6% of the non-involved, were born in Detroit. The comparable figures in the Newark survey are 53.5% and 22.5%. Outsiders who temporarily entered the city during the riot might have left before the surveys were conducted and therefore may be underestimated in the survey data. However, the arrest data, which is contemporaneous with the riot, suggests that few outsiders were involved. 90% of those arrested resided in the riot city. 7% lived in the same state, and only 1% were from outside the state. Our interviews in 20 cities corroborate these conclusions. Income. In the Detroit and Newark survey data, income level alone does not seem to correlate with self-reported riot participation. The figures from the 2 cities are not directly comparable, since respondents were asked for individual income in Detroit and family income in Newark. More Detroit self-reported rioters, 38.6%, had annual incomes over $5,000 per year than the non-involved, 30.3%.
He meant under,
even this
not
small
over.
difference disappears when the factor of age is taken into account. In the Newark data, in which the age distributions of self-reported rioters and the non-involved are more similar, there is almost no difference between the rioters, 32.6% of whom had annual incomes under $5,000, and the non-involved, 29.4% of whom had annual incomes under $5,000. The similarity in income distribution should not, however, lead to the conclusion that more affluent Negroes are as likely to riot as poor Negroes. Most surveys were conducted in disturbance areas where incomes are considerably lower than in the city as a whole and the surrounding metropolitan area. Nevertheless, the data shows that rioters are not necessarily the poorest of the poor.
No.
While income fails to distinguish self-reported rioters from those who are not involved, it does distinguish counter-rioters from rioters and the non-involved. Less than 9% of both those who rioted and those not involved earned more than $10,000 annually. Yet almost 20% of the counter-rioters earned this amount or more. In fact, there were no male self-reported counter-rioters in the Detroit survey who earned less than $5,000 annually.
Educated language,
there were 7 respondents who owned their own homes. None of them participated in the riot. While extreme poverty does not necessarily move a man to riot, relative affluence seems at least to inhibit him from attacking the existing social order and may motivate him to take
you got more to lose.
Yeah. I mean, that's with everything. If you got more to lose, then you kind of weigh yourself back. But if you ain't got nothing to lose, you'll say fuck it.
Yeah, you say fuck it. It's, except the cats who's already got a record. They're not going out there.
Risks to protect it. Education. Level of schooling is strongly related to participation. Those with some high school education were more likely to riot than those who had only finished grade school. In the Detroit survey, 93% of the self-reported rioters had gone beyond grade school, compared with 72.1% of the non-involved. In the Newark survey, the comparable figures are 98.1% and 85.7%. The majority of self-reported rioters were not, however, high school graduates. The counter-rioters were clearly the best educated of the 3 groups. Approximately twice as many counter-rioters had attended college as had the non-involved. And half as many counter-rioters had attended college as rioters. Considered with the information on income, the data suggests that counter-rioters were probably well on their way into the middle class. Education and income are the only factors which distinguish the counter-rioter from the non-involved. Apparently, a high level of education and income not only prevents rioting, but is more likely to lead to active, responsible opposition to rioting.
Yeah, they have more to lose.
Employment.
Yeah, they have a future.
Detroit and Newark surveys,
Yeah.
the arrest records from 4 cities, and the Detroit arrest study.
They can see a way out.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
As far as the person who can't, he's gonna, gets to say fuck it. He's like, I ain't going nowhere anyway, so might as well.
Yeah, I got nothing to lose. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. It makes. I mean, it's just human behavior. That's all this is really telling you.
It
Just
really
human
is.
behavior.
They all indicate that there are no substantial differences in unemployment between the rioters and the non-involved. Unemployment levels among both groups were extremely high. In the Detroit survey, 29.6% of the self-reported rioters were unemployed. In the Newark survey, 29.7%. In the 4-city arrest data, 33.2%. And in the Detroit arrest study, 21.8%. The unemployment rates for the non-involved in the Detroit and Newark surveys were 31.5 and 19.0%. Self-reported rioters were more likely to be only intermittently employed, however, than the non-involved. Respondents in Newark were asked whether they had been unemployed for as long as a month or more during the last year. 61% of the self-reported rioters, but only 43.4% of the non-involved, answered yes. Despite generally higher levels of education, rioters were more likely than the non-involved to be employed in unskilled jobs. In the Newark survey, 50% of the self-reported rioters, but only 39.6% of the non-involved, had unskilled jobs. Attitudes about employment. The Newark survey data indicate that self-reported rioters were more likely to feel dissatisfied with their present jobs than were the non-involved. Only 29.3% of the rioters, compared with 44.4% of the non-involved, thought their present jobs appropriate for them in responsibility and pay. Of the self-reported rioters, 69%, as compared with 50% of the non-involved, felt that racial discrimination was the major obstacle to finding better employment. Despite this feeling, surprising numbers of rioters, 76.9%, responded that getting what you want out of life is a matter of ability, not being in the right place at the right time. Racial attitudes. The Detroit
Wish you
and
still
Newark
had that
surveys
now.
indicate that rioters
Yeah.
have strong feelings of pride.
Alpha your way through it. Huh?
In the Detroit survey, 48.6% of the self-reported rioters said that they felt Negroes were more dependable than whites. Only 22.4% of the non-involved stated this. In Newark, the comparable figures were 45 and 27.8%. The Newark survey data indicate that rioters wanted to be called black rather than Negro or colored, and were somewhat more
That's
likely than
interesting.
the non-involved to feel that all Negroes should study African history and languages. To what extent this racial pride
And this is where it comes out of. They started calling you African American or black. They don't call you Negro no more.
Yeah, I think that's James Brown. He started that. I'm black and I'm proud. So.
Say it loud.
Dated the riot or was produced by the riot is impossible to determine from the survey data. Certainly, the riot experience seems to have been associated with increased pride in the minds of many participants. This was vividly illustrated by the statement of a Detroit rioter. Interviewer: You said you were feeling good when you followed the crowds. Respondent: I was feeling proud, man, at the fact that I was a Negro. I felt like I was a first-class citizen. I didn't feel ashamed of my race because of what they did. Similar feelings were expressed by an 18-year-old Detroit girl who reported that she had been a looter. Interviewer: What is the Negro then if he's not American? Respondent: A Negro, he's considered a slave to the white folks, but half of them know that they're slaves and feel that they can't do nothing about it because they're just going along with it. But most of them seem to get it in their heads now how the white folks treat them and how they've been treating them and how they've been slaves for the white folks. Along with increased racial pride, there appears to be intense hostility towards whites. Self-reported rioters in both the Detroit and Newark surveys were more likely to feel that civil rights groups with white and Negro leaders would do better without the whites. In Detroit, 36.1% of the self-reported rioters thought that this statement was true, while only 21.1% of the non-involved thought so. In the Newark survey, 51.4% of the self-reported rioters agreed. 33.1% of the non-involved shared this opinion. Self-reported rioters in Newark were also more likely to agree with the statement, "Sometimes I hate white people." Of the self-reported rioters, 72.4% agreed. Of the non-involved, 50% agreed. The intensity of the self-reported rioters' racial feelings may suggest that the recent riots represented traditional interracial hostilities. Two sources of data suggest that this interpretation is probably incorrect. First, the Newark survey data indicate that rioters were almost as hostile to middle-class Negroes as they were to whites. 71 and 4/10% of the self-reported rioters, but only 59.5% of the non-involved, agreed with the statement Negroes who make a lot of money like to think they are better than other Negroes. Perhaps even more
Them uppity
significant,
Negroes.
particularly in light of the rioters' strong feelings of racial pride, is that
Still true today.
55% of the self-reported rioters agreed that Negroes who make a lot of money are just as bad as white people. Only 35.2% of the non-involved shared this opinion. Second, the arrest data show that the great majority of those arrested during the disorders were generally charged with a crime relating to looting or curfew violations. Only 2.4% of the arrests were for assault and 0.1% were for homicide. But 31.3% of the arrests were for breaking and entering, crimes directed against white property rather than against individual whites. Political attitudes and involvement. Respondents in the Newark survey were asked about relatively simple items of political information, such as the race of prominent local and national political figures. In general, the self-reported rioters were much better informed than the non-involved. For example, self-reported rioters were more likely to know that one of the 1966 Newark mayoral candidates was a Negro. Of the rioters, 77.1%, but only 61.6% of the non-involved identified him correctly. The overall scores on a series of similar questions also reflect the self-reported rioters' higher levels of information. Self-reported rioters were also more likely to be involved in activities associated with Negro rights. At the most basic level of political participation, they were more likely than the non-involved to talk frequently about Negro rights. In the Newark survey, 53.8% of the self-reported rioters, but only 34.9% of the non-involved, said that they talked about Negro rights nearly every day. The self-reported rioters also were more likely to have attended a meeting or participated in civil rights activity. Of the rioters, 39.3%, but only 25.7% of the non-involved, reported that they had engaged in such activity. In the Newark survey, respondents were asked how much they thought they could trust the local government. Only 4.8% of the self-reported rioters, compared with 13.7% of the non-involved, said that they felt they could trust it most of the time. 44.2% of the self-reported rioters and 33.9% of the non-involved reported that they could almost never trust the government.
Mm-hmm.
In the Detroit survey, self-reported rioters were much more likely to attribute the riot to anger about politicians and police than were the non-involved. Of the self-reported rioters, 43.2%, but only 19.6% of the non-involved, said anger against politicians had a great deal to do with causing the riot. Of the self-reported rioters, 70.5%, compared with 48.8% of the non-involved, believed that anger against the police had a great deal to do with causing the riot. Perhaps the most revealing and disturbing measure of the rioters' anger at the social and political system was their response to a question asking whether they thought the country was worth fighting for in the event of a major world war. Of the self-reported rioters, 39.4% in Detroit and 52.8% in Newark shared a negative view.
Mm-hmm.
In contrast,
Yeah.
15.5% of the non-involved in Detroit,
White man's army.
8% of the
Yep.
non-involved in Newark shared the sentiment. Almost none of the self-reported counter-rioters in Detroit, 3.3%, agreed with the self-reported rioters. Some comments of interviewees are worthy of note. Not worth fighting for. If Negroes had an equal chance, it would be worth fighting for.
Mm-hmm.
Not worth fighting for. I'm not a true citizen, so why should I?
Mm-hmm.
Not worth fighting for. Because my husband came back from Vietnam and nothing had changed.
That's why Charles, we talk about that joining the police force and joining the army. That's where it
Yep.
comes from.
Yeah, because I mean, like I said, it just makes sense. If you're gonna fight for a country that's still
Yeah.
gonna treat you like shit,
Yeah.
you're gonna be like, yeah, fuck this place.
Mm-hmm.
It's not worth fighting for.
Yeah,
Why am I
that's what
fighting? Why am I fighting? I'm still a second-class citizen.
Yeah, 'cause every war where you came back from, they started harassing and hanging black
Yeah. If you were
soldiers in their uniform.
if you were in a uniform out and about, there was a good chance you could get hung. It was like,
Mhm.
and nobody would do nothing about it. Nothing. Get pulled out of your house. It's like, oh, you gonna fight in a war? Okay, all right.
Do you think you're uppity now because you fought in the war?
You ain't got no rights, nigga.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the sentiment. So, I mean, but most of this, all this really did is just show you what human behavior was. If you give people no chance to, or have no ability to move up out of poor situations, you push them down and you do stuff to them, and they feel like they can get no justice. Then all this is you're just a ticking time bomb.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you've seen riots with white people doing the same thing.
Yeah. And so, I mean, basically just human behavior. This is just pretty much telling you that, if you're going to manage people, you can't do this.
Mm-hmm.
So this is an interesting section. I thought it was interesting. On this one, I'm going to do a video on because I know B just busy at the moment. So We don't go through this, but it's going to go through the federal programs. So,
Okay,
but,
yeah, yeah. All the programs are going
hmm
to alleviate it. Yeah. So yeah,
yeah,
this is where a lot of this stuff comes from. AFDC, lunch programs, all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
yep. Community action programs,
Mm-hmm.
welfare.
Mm-hmm.
Right here, you got grievances that still talking about
Mm-hmm.
first, second, and third level intensities, disrespectful white attitudes,
Mm-hmm.
inadequacy federal programs,
Mm-hmm.
social services, customer civil practices, inadequate welfare programs. So,
Yep. 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 That's where you got all this sensitivity training for white folks on jobs and stuff like that. That's where all this
hmm
stuff comes from. All your affirmative action. This is this is the commission, and this is the document where it actually boosted that stuff because they didn't want people burning. They didn't want black folks continue burning down cities.
hell, dude, they keep burning down. You ain't gonna have a city. But anything on this part, sir, before we head on out?
um, well, basically, it's good to look back because people think that that things have. I mean, things have gotten better. You know, they have gotten better because they don't want to continue for this stuff to continually happen. But the thing is, people need to know why you have what you have. Okay, you didn't just get it because white folks felt like they wanted to be nice to you. Okay, or they're tired of getting racist. No, they didn't. This is the reason that you got what you got. And it took people getting out in the streets and doing some, sometimes some unsavory things for it to happen.
Yeah, that's true. And that's why I don't like when people say like, "Oh, why we got to keep looking back into the past and stuff like that." It's just like you have to know where you came from to know where you're gonna go.
Yeah,
And what
and
this really is telling you is just if you can look at this from a past document and look
hmm
to where we at now, and you can get a pinpoint of where they're trying to go in the future.
yeah, or how far you've gone.
Yeah,
And what what changed from that time to this, because a lot of well, a lot of young folks think that it's always been that way. No, it didn't happen. Okay,
no,
or white folks have just felt generous and want to include us. Nah, that didn't happen. This is the reason why um, that you got what you got. That you got affirmative action. You got these laws, the laws that a lot of young folks want to give up. I don't see why we still have to do that. In fact, I was talking to a guy on Art New Styles panel, a young guy. He was saying, "Why do we have to continue to have this?" I said, do you trust white folks, white men, and white folks actually to do the right thing if you get rid of the laws or the rules?" He said, "No."
mm,
I said, "There
all
you
right,
have it." Mm-hmm.
there you go. That's why you
Mm-hmm.
have it because they can't. If they get rid of the laws, I guarantee you, a lot of people will be fired right now.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, yeah.
They'll-
Eventually, yeah, or a lot of young people coming up wouldn't get jobs.
yeah, like I remember there was a thing I was reading, and
Mm-hmm.
it was a white company. He had one black employee,
Mm.
and
Yep.
he said, "This guy keeps me out of trouble."
Keeps you out of trouble. Yeah, they
Yeah,
have you
because
have
I.
federal mandates.
hmm Yeah, truth as I know, I wanted to ask you a question about gang banging. Yeah, I'm not too sure.
Bang, riot, the gang banging and riot. No, not really. Gang banging and rioting don't have a connection. Normally, uh, very seldom do gang bangers actually riot. Normally, it's the local folks on the street. Gang bangers actually move a little differently.
Yeah.
So riots and gang banging, no. Normally, those are the local citizens. They kind of get tired, and it depends on what went on before. Um, like you got to remember in the L.A. riots, especially in '92, you had Latasha Harlins, and then you had Rodney King beating, and then you had a trial, and those four cops did get off. And then at the time when it really started, you had a disturbance in I think it was in Florence and Normandy, because that's where it started. You had a bunch of cops trying to come in and arrest a bunch of guys, and then the whole neighborhood came out. And that's where it
hmm
started. And it started from that little section. They put it on TV. And you can see like a load of police cars bailing out away from that area, man, because they knew it was getting ready to go down. But normally it's spontaneous. Normally it's the local citizens. It's not gangs that actually start riots. Very so, because gangs, most gangbangers have a record. They're not trying to start nothing with the police, knowing that they're gonna go to jail. They're trying to
Yeah.
stay out of jail. Is contrary to popular belief, gangbangers do not like really going to jail if they can help it.
Ah, that's they don't want to be out and be away from the money.
Mm-hmm.
uh, Drew Main, appreciate you for the $5. Says, damn, thanks for adding context to all this. Not a problem. That's the reason why I'm doing it, because it needs to be told. And I'm happy to have BGS out here to help me go through this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is if you want to know where you got the economic component from, this is where you get it from. And even Martin Luther King was pushing for the check. In other words, the economic rights. Monahan had said it, but the thing is, they didn't have any. Johnson didn't have any impetus to actually
Enforce it.
enforce it. After this, they did, because he didn't want this to continue to happen.
Yeah. Did the bare minimum.
Mm-hmm.
That's what
Well, hell,
most things do.
yeah, they're still doing the bare minimum. The thing is, after all this, guess who really profited? It wasn't black men; it was actually white women and black women.
Mm-hmm. Because they implemented the whole the gender of women as a minority.
As a minority, yep. Yep. Yeah, Johnson did that when it's executive order.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm gonna do videos on these. But yeah, I implore people to get this PDF if you want to go through and read it.
Mm-hmm.
You can just type in the 1968 Kerner Commission, and you should be able to pull up a PDF and download it for free. It's free. You ain't got to pay for it. So, but
yeah, you should know this. There's two documents that you like, the Monahan report and this one are the two documents that you should be aware of, because these are the ones they're least likely to actually mention in school. You're gonna know about the Civil Rights Act. You're gonna know about Title IX. You're gonna know about a whole bunch of other stuff, but you won't read about these two documents. You have to really know. You have to be in the know to actually, because I didn't know about it. I knew about the Monahan report, but I didn't know about the Kerner Commission until I was old, basically. And said, "Oh shit," when they actually started talking about the Kerner Commission.
Oh, I was opposite. I heard the Kerner Commission before I heard the Monahan report.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, because I think the first time I got wind of the Kerner Commission was back in 2009.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard about it, so I was like, oh, okay. But the Monahan report, I didn't learn that. I think about 2015. I think it because of you, about the Negro family. But yeah, because I was interested, because I remember seeing that book that I got. That's when I was hearing about the Kerner Commission. So it was an interesting document. Like I said, every time I look at it piece by piece, I find something new.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like I said, it is a large document that I'm not going to go through all the way, but I'm going to go through some of it. That's
the OG Crips were actually started by the Black Panthers, and then once the Black Panthers got arrested and got disbanded, they didn't have anybody to actually keep them under control, and then they kind of spiraled out into what you see now. And then they got worse. It wasn't as bad. It was bad, but it wasn't as bad until the drug money came in, and that's when it kind of exploded.
Yeah. Drugs, guns, and violence, and money.
Money, yeah. Look what's going on in Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
Look what's going on in Mexico. Mexico is probably one of the most violent places in the world. Why? Because of drug money.
Yep. But anyway, sir, I know you're busy. I know you got things to do. So
All right.
I got a steak I need to cook.
All right. What's the meal? Steak and what?
Steak, potatoes, and some green beans.
Oh, okay. Okay. Pretty standard.
Yeah, pretty standard. Not too expensive.
No, nothing exciting, but hearty meal.
Hey, gets the job done.
Gets the job done.
Anyway,
they would say black folks eating high on a hog, huh?
Mm-hmm. I'm an uppity Negro.
Not quite an educated lame, but close. Huh?
Yeah. I was out there saying, "Cool it."
What you Negroes doing? Hey, don't throw that rock.
No, really. I need to cool it. That's funny. anyway, I appreciate you guys for coming through. Next week, I am going to be going through what's it? What did I say? Page 95.
Mhm.
Which one was that? Go back there. I think this is a basic cost. No. Next is 95. So we are going to
Okay.
go.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Protest,
Uh,
rejection, and the
historical sketch. Okay.
Yeah. That's the next one for next week. I'm going to do pages 95 through 113, or close to it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So this is just going to go through the historical, what happened in the past during after slavery, the periods, the colonial period, as you see right here, Negroes to be sold on board ships, Constitution and the laws, discrimination and doctrine, and the same old shit.
Yeah. The same old stuff. They went into a deeper detail than the Monahan report. So this is a much deeper dive. Basically the same things, but a much deeper dive. How do we get here, and what shapes the Negro family or the Negro community?
Yeah, so Reconstruction,
Mm-hmm.
segregation by law. So this is going to go through pretty much everything. I'm probably going to have to make timestamps.
Mm-hmm. Critical race theory, huh?
Someone was telling me that y'all were arguing that.
Yeah, you know what? So I actually did some research. You know what? The real reason behind this critical race theory stuff is going on.
What's that?
They don't want. Remember the 1619 project by actually released by this chick. Yeah, they don't want the schools that you use the documents from the 1619 project. That's like they actually protesting the critical race theory. In fact, I got a video I got to cut up and actually do talking about that. I heard a teacher saying, I said they just don't want teachers to use the information from the 1619 project, which is why they're passing these critical race theory laws. So it's all behind, because I was wondering, I said, why all of a sudden that this stuff's, critical race theory has been around for
Yeah.
like 50 years, and all of a sudden it just pops up.
Pops up. Yeah.
Yeah, because they're trying to stop the 1619 project from being taught in schools. That's what it is.
So that's what it is. Okay.
That's all it is. Because I was wondering, I said, after I saw it, I said, oh shit, that makes sense. But they can't say that they don't want it taught in schools because that would seem racist. So they come up with this other, straw man, which is critical race theory.
Well.
That is the reason. If they had said that on the panel, and I would have understood, because I kept saying, "Well, what are you talking about?" I said, "What kind of critical race theory are they teaching? Or what do you think is critical race theory?" Well, it's this set of objectives. I said, "What are they?" They could never name them. But if they had said this, from the 1619 project, I said, "Okay, that makes sense." We could have looked it up and we could have agreed or disagreed. But the thing is, wouldn't have gone on as long as it would have, because they're bringing in communism and leftists and all that kind of stuff. Come on, it's none of that bullshit. Yeah, the white folks just don't want to have their dirty laundry aired out. That's all.
Yeah, that's all that protest is. Because it's like it's gonna make our children feel bad. No, it's not. It's making you feel bad because what's happening really is that the kids are coming back to the parents asking them questions that they don't want to answer and they can't. And it's pretty much like, what did we do?
And did you know it? Yeah, did you know? And most people don't, because it was never taught. And white folks don't want it taught because they're trying to forget it.
Yeah, that's what I would tell you. It's like, stop worrying about it. Stop worrying about it.
Even the black folks stop worrying about it.
It's like when your parents do something bad in front of you, but they said, "Yeah, don't look over here."
Like imagining your parents having sex. Yeah.
You didn't see what you saw.
You didn't see what you saw. Yeah.
And that's all it is. But my thing is this: it's like, this is just me personally. If you're gonna tell the history, just tell the truth. Stop putting damn butterflies and rainbows on that shit.
Yeah.
Just tell the hardcore fucking truth about what it is, because it's the only way, in my personal opinion, that we're actually gonna end the sins of this nation, if that's
Mm-hmm.
what you want to do. Because you're gonna
Mm-hmm.
have to tell it. You gotta confess what you did and what we need to do to fix it. If you don't want to confess, then this stuff is gonna keep happening and happening,
Mm-hmm.
and you're never gonna fix it.
Yeah. Well, they want to bury it. They don't want to fix it. They want to bury it.
Well, what's in the dark will come to the light.
Yeah. In fact, the 1619 project, the people they're talking about is actually implemented under who? Under Trump. Trump gave the directive and the okay to teach it in schools. All
Okay.
Biden did was agree with it. He might have enhanced it a little bit, but basically this was already planned. When Trump was in office.
Don't tell those right wingers that, man. Don't. And the heads will explode.
Yeah. Yep. The heads will explode. Anyway, sir, we'll let you go get your steak.
Yes, sir. You enjoy the rest of your night, sir.
All right.
And
Thank you.
everybody,
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
yeah, no problem. Likewise, it's always good to talk about interesting topics with you, sir. That's all.
Yeah, and plus the people need to come back and revisit this document because how many black people even know about it?
Not
Very
at
few
all.
people even know that it exists.
And when I
Because
try to tell people about it, they just brush it off.
well, their eyes glaze over because what does that have to do with anything?
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, you gotta know your history.
Yep.
Hmm.
2012 gay marriage. Republicans were behind gay marriage, especially the log cabin Republicans. The Republicans were not against gay marriage.
Yeah, that was a joint effort.
That's joint effort.
Yeah, you got to remember there are some gay Republicans too.
A lot of gay Republicans. A lot of gay Republicans with money.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. A lot
That
of gay
don't.
Republicans in office that just don't claim it.
A lot of gay white Republicans that don't like blacks,
Oh yeah,
unless they got a black man on their arm.
yeah. Well, yeah. They're black concubine.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
You are a sexual tool for me,
For Zaddy.
for Zaddy. Anyway, all right. Let me stop before I don't want steak anymore.
All right.
All right. Appreciate you guys for coming through. I'll see you guys next week.
All right.
Peace.
Don't forget to like the video, hit the Cash App.
Yep.
Yeah, because this is a lot of work. To do this kind of research takes a lot of hours. So, and this is a very big document. So, and it's probably not the most popular thing to actually put on your channel.
No, probably not. But it needs to be out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can't do more reaction videos of cheaters episodes.
So, wouldn't you say that feminists would also be against spreading that of the 1619 crisis sheds lights on the history of slavery in the U.S.? The white feminists probably so, some of them,
Yeah, because
but
they were
most of them
complicit
not.
in it.
Yeah, I think feminism is actually split down the middle. People think that all feminists are leftists and liberal. They're not. There's a lot of conservative feminists, lots of
Hmm.
them.
Just how they view it.
Yeah,
Pretty much like everything else.
yeah.
Everybody's point of view is going to be different about a simple certain subject, even this. So,
Yep. Yep.
but anyway, I will catch you guys later next week. Peace.
All right, folks. Peace.